The Bayeux Tapestry is one of the most renowned artifacts of the medieval world, but despite its fame, who commissioned it remains a medieval English mystery. Despite its name, it's not a woven tapestry at all, but rather a 230-foot-long embroidered linen cloth. This extraordinary artwork depicts the events leading up to the Norman conquest of England in 1066, culminating with the famous Battle of Hastings. It shows how King Edward the Confessor's death led to Harold Godwinson's contested rise to the English throne, and how William, Duke of Normandy, invaded to claim it. Created in the late 11th century and preserved in Bayeux, France, the tapestry provides a vivid visual record of this pivotal historical moment. For generations, the question of who commissioned the Bayeux Tapestry has intrigued historians. A popular legend once credited Queen Matilda, William the Conqueror's wife, with assigning the task to her ladies-in-waiting. In fact, the tapestry was often nicknamed Queen Matilda's Tapestry. However, no contemporary evidence supports that story, and modern scholarship instead points to another patron behind this vast project. Today, the leading theory is that it was commissioned by Bishop Odo of Bayeux, William's half-brother. Odo was a powerful figure in the aftermath of the conquest, serving as Bishop of Bayeux and as Earl of Kent in England. Several clues strengthen the case for Odo's patronage. He appears prominently throughout the tapestry, second only to William and Harold in appearances. These include a scene where he blesses a feast for the Norman army and another where he rallies the Norman troops in battle. Historians generally believe that this is an unusual emphasis on the bishop if he played no hand in its commissioning. Notably, the tapestry was also found in Bayeux Cathedral, a church that Odo built and dedicated in the 1070s, suggesting it was originally made for display there. Further, minor characters of no real historical significance are included in the tapestry, such as Waddard, a minor nobleman. This is significant because him and other minor figures appearing by name were recorded in the Domesday Book as tenants of Odo. Together, these details make a compelling case that Bishop Odo was the one who commissioned the work. Many believe the tapestry was first displayed in 1077 at the dedication of Odo's new cathedral in Bayeux, with King William in attendance. Unfurling this huge embroidered chronicle in such a setting would have dramatically driven home the Normans' version of history to everyone present. In that sense, the tapestry was medieval propaganda, designed to reinforce the legitimacy of King William's claim over all others vying for the English throne in 1066. While Odo is the leading candidate, scholars have explored other theories. Some suggest that King William himself, or another Norman lord, might have ordered the tapestry to commemorate the victory. An unusual hypothesis even proposes an English patron, for example, Edith of Wessex, King Edward's widow and Harold's sister, as the sponsor. According to this theory, it portrays some of the defeated Anglo-Saxons with a degree of dignity, hinting that the sponsor may have been Anglo-Saxon. However, this theory isn't widely accepted, and though it can't be confirmed with certainty, Bishop Odo appears to be the man behind this legendary artifact. In the early 13th century, King John of England sat on a troubled throne. As the youngest son of the famed Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine, John had never been expected to rule. But after the death of his elder brother Richard the Lionheart in 1199, John unexpectedly inherited the crown. What followed was a reign marred by military failures, political strife, and a reputation so notorious that no English king since has dared to take the name John. John's reign, running from 1199 to 1216, went fairly poorly from the beginning. He earned the derisive nickname John Lackland, initially because as a young prince he received no significant inheritance. As king, he lived up to that name by losing vast territories on the continent. In 1204, John's forces were defeated by King Philip II of France, costing England the Duchy of Normandy and most of its lands in France. This loss not only damaged royal prestige, but also sowed resentment among John's vassals. Many of them held estates on both sides of the Channel, and to put it mildly, they weren't happy to lose their wealthy continental holdings. These upset vassals would spark the chain of events that would lead to King John losing a vast sum of wealth under mysterious circumstances, just days before his passing. John's response to his losses on the continent was to tighten his grip on England. He levied harsh taxes and fines to fund attempts at reconquest and to fill his treasury, breeding further discontent. King John's personality did him no favors, and medieval chroniclers and later historians alike describe him as volatile and vindictive. For instance, John was widely blamed for the mysterious death of his nephew Arthur of Brittany, a rival claimant to the throne. He fought bitterly with the Church, defying Pope Innocent III's choice for Archbishop of Canterbury and earning himself a papal excommunication in 1209. Although John eventually reconciled with Rome, what's clear is that this was a man who rarely saw a bridge he didn't want to burn. By the second decade of his reign, many of England's barons had reached a breaking point. John's military campaign to reclaim his French lands ended in a disastrous defeat at the Battle of Bouvines in 1214. This humiliation, coupled with years of excessive taxation, arbitrary justice, and John's perceived abuses of power, pushed the barons into open revolt. In June 1215 at Runnymede, facing armed rebellion, King John was forced to seal the Magna Carta, a charter of liberties imposing legal limits on his authority. This could have been a moment of reconciliation, but John had no intention of honoring the agreement. Within weeks he appealed to the Pope to annul the Magna Carta, and Pope Innocent obliged, declaring the charter null and void as John had been forced to sign it. John's actions plunged England into chaos, a phrase that could be applied at many points in his reign. The conflict known as the First Barons' War consumed the kingdom. John found himself fighting not just rebellious English barons, but also foreign invaders, invited by those barons. The rebels had offered the English crown to Prince Louis of France, hoping to replace John entirely. In May 1216, Prince Louis landed in England with troops and quickly occupied London and much of the southeast. At the same time, the Scots under King Alexander II invaded from the north. John's realm was closing in on him from all sides. By late 1216, King John's situation was becoming increasingly desperate, setting the stage for one of England's great historical mysteries. In the second week of October 1216, John had established himself at the port of King's Lynn in Norfolk. There he replenished supplies and presumably planned his next moves. His ultimate goal was to regroup with his forces in the north-central part of England. To do so, John needed to travel westward from King's Lynn back toward Lincolnshire. That journey would take him around the Wash, a broad and marshy estuary on England's east coast, where several rivers empty into the North Sea. The Wash was notorious for its fast-rising tides and treacherous mud flats. Local people knew well to respect its rhythms. A traveler who mistimed the crossing or strayed from the safe paths could be swallowed by mud or cut off by the tide. On October 12th, 1216, King John made a fateful decision. He set out from King's Lynn heading northwest toward the Abbey of Swineshead in Lincolnshire, where he intended to spend the night. The king himself took a longer inland route that looped around the estuary. But in order to save time, John ordered his heavy baggage train to take a more direct route across the mouth of the Wash. The wagons, pack horses, carts carrying his treasure, the crown regalia, his portable chest of coins, important documents, and other valuable supplies were all put on this path. It was a known route at low tide, and royal guides were confident they could lead the convoy safely over the sandy estuary floor from one side to the other. Theoretically, the plan likely seemed sound. At low tide, a firm causeway of sand permitted crossing roughly where the modern counties of Norfolk and Lincolnshire meet. If all went well, the baggage convoy would cut straight west and eventually rejoin the king's party further along. Like many things in John's life, all did not go well. As the story has come down to us, disaster struck the baggage train while it was in the middle of the estuary. The details vary in different accounts, but the outcome was the same. King John's convoy of treasure was lost to the waters. According to Roger of Wendover, a contemporary chronicler, quote, "The ground opened up in the midst of the waves, and bottomless whirlpools sucked in everything. Chests of gold and jewels, precious relics and royal documents, even perhaps some of the crown jewels of England themselves, all disappeared beneath the murky tidal waters of the Wash. In an instant, all the wealth and finery John had brought with him on campaign was gone. Imagine the scene. The king, already embattled on all sides and generally in ill health, learned that nearly all the wealth he could muster had literally sunk into the sea. The shock must have been intense, and according to Roger of Wendover, this was the straw that broke the back of King John. According to Roger, he was overcome with stress and grief and fell ill with a high fever. Modern historians suspect that King John was in fact suffering from dysentery that he had contracted days earlier, and that the stress of the lost treasure simply worsened his condition. But whatever the medical truth, the symbolism was and remains powerful. Within a day of the disaster in the Wash, John's health deteriorated rapidly. He left the area, desperately pressing on despite running a high fever and being in extreme pain, but he could go only a short distance further. By October 16th, he reached Newark Castle in Nottinghamshire, collapsing in what would be his final sickbed. There, on the night of October 18th, 1216, King John died, just shy of his 50th birthday. Rumors later swirled that he might have been poisoned, and Shakespeare adopted this version of events for his play King John. However, modern historians believe that given the circumstances, dysentery exacerbated by extreme stress is a far more likely cause of death. John's death turned the tide of the conflict, and many of the rebel barons soon reconciled with John's 9-year-old son, Henry III, rather than continue to support the foreign prince. But even as the political situation shifted, the fate of King John's lost treasure remained a mystery. In the immediate aftermath, there was little chance to search thoroughly for the treasure in the dangerous quicksands. England was still at war, and retrieving sunken wagons from a tidal estuary would have been a near impossible task with the technology of the time. The baggage and its riches were given up for lost. A legend was born. Somewhere beneath the mud of the Wash lay the wealth of the English crown, waiting to be found. Almost everything we know about the loss of King John's treasure comes from medieval chroniclers. These primary sources provide our window into the past, but each must be handled with care, as their reliability ranges from sober to suspect. The most dramatic account comes from Roger of Wendover, a monk who wrote a chronicle of English history in the years following John's reign, and who I've already quoted from. Wendover vividly recounted how the royal baggage train was engulfed by the waters of the Wash, sparing nothing. It is Wendover who paints the picture of whirlpools and quicksand consuming the treasure, and who suggests that none of the men even survived to carry word to the king. This account implied that King John had to go out and observe that his entire baggage train was gone, creating a dramatic scene. Such a complete disaster had a literary ring of divine retribution, almost as if the very land rose against a villainous king. Yet not all contemporary observers agreed on the scale of the calamity. Another chronicler, Ralph of Coggeshall, also mentioned the incident but in a more tempered tone. Coggeshall Abbey was in Essex, not far from the region, and Ralph's account suggests that the loss, while unfortunate, was not as all-encompassing as Wendover claimed. According to this chronicler, some of the wagons and goods were indeed lost in the rising tide. However, his description implies it wasn't the entire baggage train, and likely not the literal crown jewels themselves lost to the event. This more measured report has led historians to believe that Wendover, and those who followed his lead, may have exaggerated for effect. It wouldn't be unusual. Medieval chroniclers often dramatized events, especially when it concerned a king with as bad a reputation as John. Writers of the era generally disliked John for his clashes with the church, or with the nobility, or with foreign rulers. Thus, they might have seen the hand of God in the sudden drowning of his riches. They turned the story into a moral lesson of hubris punished. Between these accounts and a few brief mentions in other sources, the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. Yes, King John's baggage caravan met with an accident crossing the Wash, and some items were lost. But it likely wasn't the total loss described, as Roger of Wendover's account appears to be intended to be read as the morally just ending of the nefarious King John. Over the ensuing centuries, the lost treasure of King John grew into an enduring historical mystery. Historians, archaeologists, and treasure hunters alike have been tantalized by the question, what really happened to King John's treasure, and could it ever be recovered? Many theories have been proposed, some grounded in research and others edging into the realm of legend. One line of inquiry has focused on pinpointing the exact route of John's baggage train and the location in the Wash where it met its fate. The geography of the area has changed vastly since the 13th century, as rivers have shifted course and land has been drained for agriculture. Numerous attempts were made to locate the treasure throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, but if anything was ever found, no one went public with their bountiful booty. In recent years, technology has given treasure seekers new tools. In 2015, researchers used LiDAR to scan the Wash and reconstruct its medieval coastline, trying to visualize the tidal channels as they were in John's day. The idea is that if we can figure out where the crossing was, treasure hunters might narrow down areas where remnants of the lost baggage could lie. Small digs have been conducted based on findings, but as yet nothing has turned up. The content of the lost treasure itself has invited much speculation. Some historians argue that by the fall of 1216, John's treasury was likely nearly empty. He had spent huge sums hiring mercenaries and trying to defend his throne, so perhaps the baggage train carried more personal effects and remaining regalia than actual chests full of coin. We do know, as mentioned, that John had a collection of priceless jewels and family heirlooms. One particularly intriguing object that might have been in John's baggage is the Sword of Tristan, a sword associated with Arthurian legend, and one of the crown jewels of England. Notably, the sword was later reconstructed sometime after 1216, leading some to believe that it was lost during this event. Notably, some later legends sought to embellish further on Roger of Wendover's account, likely to underscore the concept of King John losing divine favor. In these versions of events, the royal regalia lost even included the physical crown of England, the physical embodiment of the king's authority and supremacy. There's absolutely no evidence for this having had occurred, but it does add a further dramatic flair to the story, hence why it may have gotten added to the tale over the years. Hey everyone, It's Jimmy here, just reminding you to hit that like button, subscribe, and also turn on all notifications. Remember to check out my alternative channels for more content related to present-day unsolved mysteries and true crime. Also, big shout out to all my supporters and patrons. Remember, if you want to take your support to the next level, click the link below and you could help out for as little as $2 a month. In the heart of modern Reading in England, beneath a tangle of ruins and urban structures, lies an enduring historical mystery, the lost burial place of King Henry I. Henry I of England, a son of William the Conqueror and a formidable ruler in his own right, was interred nearly 9 centuries ago in a grand abbey he built for his eternal rest. Yet today, unlike many medieval monarchs whose tombs are well marked in cathedrals or castles, Henry's grave has vanished. Henry lived from 1068 to 1135 and was the youngest son of William the Conqueror, the Norman king who famously took England in 1066. Despite being the 4th son in a dynastic lineup, Henry's ambition and circumstance led him to seize the English throne in 1100 after the death of his elder brother, King William II. He earned the nickname Beauclerc for his education and literacy, a somewhat unusual reputation for a king in that era. During his 35-year reign, Henry I strengthened the crown's administrative systems and enforced justice in a manner that was considered both strict and uniform, at least for the time. His reign also brought a measure of stability after the turbulence of his father's conquest, and he worked to unite Norman and Anglo-Saxon nobility. He notably married Matilda of Scotland, a princess of the old Saxon royal line, as an olive branch to the remaining Anglo-Saxon nobles. Henry's personal life was dramatic. He had dozens of illegitimate children, yet only 2 legitimate heirs. His only legitimate son, William, died in the White Ship disaster of 1120, when a vessel carrying many young nobles sank. This loss would loom large, and with no surviving lawful son, Henry designated his daughter, Holy Roman Empress Matilda, as heir. But upon his death, the throne was usurped by Henry's nephew Stephen, which led to a period of crisis known as the Anarchy. Henry died in Normandy on December 1st, 1135. Famously, chroniclers recorded that his death came after he indulged in a surfeit of lampreys. Essentially, he gorged himself out of existence on his favorite eel-like fish. Whether it was truly the medieval lamprey mukbang or other causes, the 67-year-old king's demise far from home set in motion a challenging journey for his body. Henry had founded a grand abbey at Reading in Berkshire and intended it to be his burial place. So, upon his death, his attendants were tasked with transporting his remains back to England for interment in the Abbey Church. The journey was not a simple one. Medieval practices of preservation were grisly by modern standards, but necessary for a lamprey-stuffed body that needed to travel across the English Channel in style. According to chroniclers, Henry's corpse was embalmed and eviscerated. His heart and vital organs were removed and buried separately in Normandy, at a priory in Rouen, as was common for kings at the time. His body was treated with salt and wrapped in animal hides to slow decomposition. Even so, the tales say the corpse began to smell so badly that one of the men charged with preparing it died from the foul fumes. To make matters worse, stormy winter weather delayed the crossing. Henry's body waited in the Norman port of Caen for weeks until the seas calmed. It was only around Christmas 1135 that a ship carrying the king's remains finally set sail for England. When Henry's body arrived on English shores, it was met by his loyalists, including his nephew Stephen, who had quickly moved to claim the crown for himself in the political vacuum. The body was brought in a somber procession to Reading Abbey, the very monastery Henry had established years earlier in 1121. There, on January 3rd, 1136, King Henry I was laid to rest with all the ceremony the medieval church could muster. The burial was a grand affair. The Archbishop of Canterbury and multiple bishops were present, rich offerings were made at the altar, and alms were distributed to the poor in the king's memory. An effigy of Henry, dressed in royal regalia, was displayed above his coffin during the rites. In the years after Henry's burial, Reading Abbey flourished as a spiritual center and as a prestigious royal mausoleum. Other members of the royal family were buried in or around the Abbey church, eager to rest near the tomb of a king. The Abbey's stature and the sanctity of housing a great king's remains made it a favored site for royals and nobles to pray, donate wealth, and seek burial for generations. For 4 centuries after Henry I's funeral, anyone visiting the high altar of Reading Abbey would have been at the very spot where the king was buried. A medieval pilgrim or courtier might have seen a monument or tomb marker honoring Henry's grave. But today, if one searches for Henry's tomb, there's nothing visible beyond a somewhat minimalistic historical plaque affixed to a fragment of ruined wall in the Abbey ruins. This begs the question, what exactly happened to this influential English king's tomb? The answer lies in the tumultuous events of the 16th century. In the 1530s, Henry VIII famously broke from Rome and led the dissolution of the monasteries, a sweeping secularization effort. In 1539, Reading Abbey was formally dissolved under this campaign. Its monks were expelled, its treasures confiscated, and its buildings left to ruin or reuse. In a grim footnote, the last abbot of Reading, Hugh Farringdon, was hanged, drawn, and quartered for resisting Henry VIII's efforts. With the Abbey's dissolution, the maintenance of Henry's tomb came to an end. Worse, the site became a target for looters and opportunists. Fixtures were stripped for their materials, and graves that once would have been sacred were now seen as sources of valuables. According to later accounts, Henry's grave did not escape this fate. A legend holds that the king had been buried in an expensive silver-lined coffin, and during the mid-16th century, the derelict Abbey church was scavenged by treasure seekers. Any remains of the king inside could have been scattered or perhaps accidentally reburied under the crumbling abbey. By the late 16th century, the once magnificent church was a roofless shell, and over time its stones were carted off for other building projects. Without a community of monks to protect it, or anyone to preserve the memory, Henry's burial site became a forgotten spot among weeds and ruins. A large county jail was constructed in the vicinity of the Abbey's east end in the 1840s, and a school and later an orphanage were built near or on the old Abbey grounds. The traditional historical consensus as to where Henry's remains are is straightforward. Henry was definitely buried at Reading Abbey, in front of the high altar of the Abbey's church. So the mystery isn't that we don't know where he was buried, it's that we don't know where that burial spot is now, or if anything is left of it. Over the years, scholars have pieced together the likely layout of Reading Abbey's church from old plans and limited excavations. Using these, they can pinpoint where the high altar once stood. However, because later buildings covered the area, there's debate on the precise alignment of the medieval church with today's landscape. In recent years, the mystery of Henry's burial place has drawn renewed attention, especially following the dramatic find of King Richard III's skeleton in 2012. If one lost king could be located under modern pavement, why not search for another? In 2015 and 2016, ground-penetrating radar was used in a parking lot around the Reading jail, and the results ended up showing potential grave-like anomalies. Unfortunately, a large portion of the findings ended up being under the jail itself and under a local school, providing significant complications to any attempt to dig. Prince William, the Duke of Cambridge, and a descendant of Henry I, came out to visit the site and lend his support for any future dig. However, as of 2025, despite this support, the site has yet to be excavated and the body of King Henry has yet to be given a proper reburial.